Hello, welcome. Today, I will be showing you how to push your Android Studio project to GitHub properly like a senior. Not just by uploading code, but by using workflow professional developers use in real teams. We will start from an empty project, initialize Git from the terminal, set up gitignore to protect our secrets, write a clean README, and then push using feature branches, pull requests, and peer review. By the end, your repository won't just be online, it will be structured, secured, and ready for collaboration. So let's jump right in. Alright, let's start by creating a new project in Android Studio. So we select an empty activity. Then here we're going to call this GitHub practice app. So we leave every other thing as it is. Then let's give this a little time for our project to build. So our project have completed its build. So what we do next now, if we go to our files directory here, you discover that we already have a gitignore file here with some files that are already ignored by for GitHub. Then we can always do two things. Either we start adding the extra gitignore file like .environment file, the keystore and all that. We can just add them here up, or we can also just create more files through this directory here to add any maybe readme file, whatever we want to add. But I prefer to work with the terminal. So in the terminal, I'm going to say cd. My project usually goes to my Android Studio project folder. So it depends on where your project is saved. So we go to Android Studio projects / GitHub practice app, like that. So now we're in the root directory for that GitHub practice app. If you want to confirm, you can say pd to see that we're in that root directory, or ls to check for our build.gradle and app file. So everything looks exactly fine. So the next thing is now to configure our Git identity. So we do this because if you're working in a large team or this project, you are planning to invite other contributors or other developers to help you out, so that you'll be able to track who does what and when. So that is why we do the identity configuration, so that you can know who did what, and in case you want to highlight something or flag something on their code, you can also email them and know who to ask. Okay, so we start that with git config -- global user.name. Then you can say Stephen here and click enter again. So you say git again to add the email config -- global user.email, and you can add my email and say stephen@email.com, like that. Remember to close the quotes. So with that, now we have our configuration set up. So if you want to check that, or check the list of people who are contributing, who have been configured for this particular project, maybe you told your team that everybody should configure and add, so you can just type list like this. So you can see it shows my name and my email address right here. So with that, you'll see that later, that with that you can know when we make our first commit, you see it comes out with the name and all that. So I know you might be wondering, can't we use the terminal in the Android Studio? Yes, we can actually use the terminal in the Android Studio, which is already pointing to the root to this particular project here. So if that's your preference, then good and fine. But I prefer to work on the Mac terminal. So now that we have configured our Git identity, we know who is doing what and when. So the next thing we need to do is to initialize Git, so that Git can actually track our project locally. So git init b main. So now initialize empty Git repository in the user directory, blah blah blah. So now you can see the Git can actually track our project. You see the color change is showing that it's being tracked, and now Git has also been added up here. So what this does is that in the main branch is always our production save branch. So in a real team, we do not push directly into the main. We use feature branches and pull requests to add features to the main, to the production app, or update something. Then after peer review, then if the update is allowed, then it can be merged to the main branch or into the production system. So now, since our Android Studio already have an existing gitignore file here with some of these files that it has ignored, so through our terminal we can actually see what's in our gitignore file, because we need to create this ignore file so that we can show our local machine settings and sensitive files to be out, so that Git cannot track them, to be out of Git control. So once we commit it, the whole team can actually share the same gitignore rules and observe them accordingly. Okay, so to see what we have in our gitignore file, let's say cat.gitignore, and here you can see all the files that is in our gitignore file already. So now if you have some extra files that you want to add, this is the time to add them. And to add them, we can also use cat again. So we say cat. So mind you, this is append for cat, but if you use one angle bracket, it's going to be to overwrite everything that is already existing, which doesn't make sense because this is actually good from Android Studio. So double angle bracket, it actually means append. So we say git.gitignore, then we add our closing tag, which is EOF, like that. So now it's requesting for us to paste the update. So I think I've copied that. So I've copied that here and I've pasted that here. So if I click enter again, it's going to go to a new line. Then we type that our closing tag, and once I click enter, that has been added. So if we say cat.gitignore again, we'll see if the update happen. As you can see, we have those additional files added, and even in our Android Studio you can see it has been updated as well. So now that we have updated our gitignore file, we are good to go. So we can expose we will mistakenly expose our secret keys, our API keys. We know a lot of us have been guilty of this. I myself have done this many times. You get excited about a new project or a new feature build, you jump on, and before you know it, you start getting those notifications in your email that you have exposed some secret, and that needs to be checked. Okay, so now that we've done that, let's create like a placeholder or an example secret file, so that this example secret file will be committed to Git, so that other people who are contributing to the project will know that there is some local files that they need to add, like the API keys or the base URL, whatever, for the API you're using, so that they can actually do that in their own projects. Okay, so let's do that now. So we say touch secrets.properties.example. Okay, so now we have created that file. So we can also use cat again. So cat, now we can just use the only angle bracket and call secrets. What am I doing here? .properties.example. Then we can add our tag again, UF. Then now the secret file. So here we paste our secret file here, and if we click enter again, we enter our UF and close that. So if we say cat secrets, let's see if we can see that with cat secrets.properties.example. You see, so we can see those dummy files that we added now. So even if we go to, has it come up here yet? Yes. So if we go here, you see that file. So you see, so these users now can now see this as part of their file. So now what you do is, to get this secret, to create the actual secret file in your local file, what you just simply do is you just say cp secrets.properties.example, then secrets readme.properties file. This is the actual properties file, properties like this. So once you've created that will come up here shortly. So that's the actual secret file. So now you can now replace this dummy link here with your actual base URL and replace the API key once you get to that stage. So now that we have done that, you see how you can now you are being transparent to the other team or other people that you are, maybe you're a founder that you bring into your team later, so that they can know what to do from the get-go. Okay, so now that we've done that, let's now create our readme file. So we use touch and say readme.md like this. So we've created a readme file as well. So the same way we can say cat, we can say override, because I know this, okay, this have not come, okay, it has come up. So our readme file is empty, so there's nothing to override, so there's no risk there. So we can just say cat, then readme.md, then we say EOF again, and we click enter. So let's copy the readme file. Now that we've copied the readme file, we just paste it here and click enter again, then this is our close tag, and we get out of that. You see our readme file have been added. So this is our readme file. Now that our readme file has been added, we can add something else here. Where is the readme? This is the readme. Yeah, I think I copied the wrong thing on the readme. I pasted the gitignore files. Okay, I think I have the right thing now. So let's use our cat again. Then now we're going to actually overwrite our readme file because we have just added the wrong thing. .md, and our close tag is EOF. Then we paste the actual readme file. So you see this looks like a readme file. Then we call our EOF. Right. So if we say cat readme.md, okay, so now you see we've now overwritten that initial error. So for users who want to contribute to this project, you can add some information for them in the readme. So let's copy this, copy and paste that here. So let's call this contributing and tell them what to do if they want to contribute. So I'll just paste that here. Let's just add this here to make it, to indent it and give it like bullet points. Okay, so now our readme has also been updated with some new information. So when you start building your app, you want to add your screenshots and all that, you can just update that in the remote on GitHub or on your local file. So now that we've finished with that, now the next thing we need to check here is to check what GitHub is tracking at this point in time. So we can say git status, and now we can see the files that GitHub is tracking. So GitHub is tracking all these files. It's tracking our gitignore, but not the actual file that I wanted to ignore, like the secret properties file. You can't see the actual secret.property file. The only one you can see GitHub can track is the one with the example. Okay. So now that we've seen all that, so we say git, now we're trying to add this to dot, which shows you should add everything that is tracking. Then we say, let's check git status again to actually find out what is being tracked in detail. So now what you do now is you need to take your time and inspect this and see that none of the files that you have indicated in your git ignore is here, and we can't see any of them here. So that means we are safe at this point in time. So now we can say git commit. So we say the show that was performed is actually we initialize Android project with GitHub ready setup. Okay, so we can commit that. So you see we have committed all this file. Now that we've committed the file, we need to go to GitHub and create the actual repository for this file. So because right now everything we're doing is on our local device, even though we have initialized Git, but it's just still in our local device. So in GitHub we'll create a new repository, and this new repository is going to be our GitHub what did I call the app itself? You say GitHub practice app. Okay, so GitHub practice app, like this. So the name is available. So this is a simple demonstration to show how senior devs add projects to GitHub, right? So let's give that name respect. Okay, so now the visibility, we're going to leave it public. We will not add the README because we've added it locally, so it will just update by the time we connect. Then gitignore, we've already added that, so we don't need any license here. So we create our repository. So now that we've created our repository, we have the HTTP, we have the SSH. So the HTTP has some issues. Now it doesn't take password. You have to create an access token for you to use this, but that's kind of a headache. So what we're going to do now is we're going to create an SSH app in our app using our terminal. So let's go and do that. So now to generate SSH key, we say SSH keygen -t ed. This is just a default ID EDD519-C. So now I'll add my email address, my actual email address. So now you add your own actual email address, or if you have created this before, you can skip this part. So without my email address, I'm going to, so you say generating public private key pair. So we'll just leave everything. We're not entering any file, leave it as default, click enter. Then I want to override. I've done this before, so I'll say yes. So enter the phrase, just leave it, enter that again. So now we have created the SSH key. So to copy the public key that is available, say cat.ssh/id_ed25519.pub, like this. So now this is the SSH which ends with my email address. So I will copy that. Once I copy that, I go back to GitHub. So if I go back to GitHub, I click on your profile, you go to GitHub settings. So if you go to GitHub settings, you go to SSH and GPG keys here, then new key, SSH key. I paste the SSH key here. Then here I can call it anything I like. I call it my local MAC, yeah. Then add the SSH key. So now that I've added the SSH key, now we'll go back to our terminal and Android Studio. We can now check if that connection was successful. So we say ssh-t git@github.com. We'll say, hi, Stephen Namani, and you have successfully authenticated, but GitHub does not provide share access. Ignore that. So now we are successfully authenticated. Now what we do is to push all the changes that we've done in our local file to the repository that we've just created, which if you go back to the browser, you will understand that that repository at this point is still quite empty. There's no readme, there's nothing, but see the magic happen right now. So now what we do is we say git remote. We now need to push, because we committed this initially, set URL, then origin. Then now we need to copy this SSH key. Oh, this is the HTTP key. URL here, copy this, then go to the terminal and paste that here. So once we paste that, we click enter. No such remote origin here. Okay. So we are having this issue because we're trying to set if you have a look here, we're trying to set a URL for the origin that doesn't exist on the remote, because actually when we created that, we don't have any file here yet. It's just a shell repository, if you want to call it that. So now we need to add that origin. Let's say git remote add origin. Then we paste that. No, I've copied the wrong thing here. We paste our SSH key again, copy this, and we paste that here. So once we paste that here, let's make sure that we have the origin. So we say git remote -v So now we have that, we have the origin. So now we can actually push our code to that remote. So we say git push origin main. So we give that a little bit of time. So our application is now pushed to Git. So it says 74 objects done and 74/74. So we're good to go. Nothing was skipped. And now if we reload this page, we'll be able to find, you see now our repository is populated. We have everything that we've added, and we have our gitignore with all the files that was added. Then now if we go back here, you see one commit. So you see Stephen was the one that made this commit. So that is why we did that our git config. You see start show is showing Stephen committed 19 minutes ago. So assuming someone else does that, let's say John, it will show that John was actually the one that made this particular commit. So you see we can track things, and we can know who did what at what time and when and how, so that we'll be able to track what's going on with our project. So now our projects have been connected to GitHub. The whole world now can view our project in GitHub. We can set some rule sets. So for this particular project, we can go to settings and set some rule sets. So once we set the rule sets, we can set a new rule set, new branch rule set. So you see all the things we can set here. We can set the name and enforce the status. We can say target branches. So now we can actually set the target to be our main branch. We don't want anybody to add anything to our main branch, and somebody can actually bypass. You can select somebody to bypass it, like maybe admin kind of, or the product owner kind of, so can bypass to do stuff, because I think if they are the last point of call, so that if anything changes, everybody knows they did it. So now here you can set restrict creation, allow user to bypass permission to create matching reference. You see, so you can set all these rules as you wish to, so that you can, it's kind of a guardrail for your repository. So then anybody who wants to make a contribution, so you can actually add contributors and give them some access as you wish. Then anybody, maybe it's an open source or somebody saws this repository and plan to update it, then they can just create a new branch and create a pull request, implement their changes, just like we've added in our README. So just like we've added in our README, they can create a feature branch if they're adding a new feature. If it's an update, they can just do the whole project, make your changes, commit with a clear message, push your branch, open a pull request review. Then once the review is approved, then you can merge it to the main branch after testing. Okay, I think we've covered most of the things that we need to cover in this. And this is how you push your project from your local machine to GitHub properly, like a senior. We started with creating our project. We created our git config to identify who is contributing to our project. Then we initialized Git, and we protected sensitive files with gitignore, and also added a professional README. We then connected our local files with GitHub using SSH key. After that, we committed our project and pushed to GitHub so that others can see and contribute to our project. I also showed you how to create rule sets to protect the main branch and contribute by creating feature branch, open a pull request review with clear message. This is the difference between simply uploading code and managing a project like a professional developer. In the next video, we will look into testing, so stay tuned. And if you have not subscribed, please do subscribe, because this helps us creating content like this, and so that other people will also benefit and see the project as you've seen it. Until the next one, stay safe.